what is something you hope to get out of this workshop tonight or today for many of you?
You'll jump in, Stephanie. I'd just
Okay.
be keen to hear how other people are using the
Mm,
tools, or in particular, Deeper Signals tool, in both individual and for me more so team development and team coaching.
okay, great. So there's so much to cover with interpretation. So tonight we're just focusing on the individual, but I think you'll start to, you can translate that to how drivers at the team level, what that says for a group of people. But we will have another workshop in the future dedicated to team interpretation. So step by step, starting with the individual. And I'll be talking about, my experiences. Some of the interactions are based on the research that's out there, but others are just combinations that I see based on my experience and that other people kind of call out, or specific combinations that for to develop in terms of delivery or innovation or whatever that might be. So I'm going to get started, but before I turn to the slide deck, I just want to remind you all that this will be a very interactive session, and I'd love to, hear from you, ask questions, speak up, speak over me, type your questions in the chat, so that we can really make this a rich conversation. So we won't do introductions. Like I said, we had too many of you sign up, but I'm happy that you're here. Like I said earlier, I know we have some, excuse me, we have some certified coaches. We have some people that are maybe new to Deeper Signals, but I'll introduce myself. So I'm Stephanie Sands. I am the head of coaching and leadership development at Deeper Signals, and I've been with the team from the start. And I really joined this team because I have a lot of respect for the founders and a lot of respect for the tool. I've used many other psychometric tools in my practice as a consultant and as a coach. And I kept running into the same challenges, mainly around scalability, doing a full interview psychometric assessment with top leadership, having them see the value in this process and really engaging with it and growing from it and wanting their teams to experience that. But, having to make some cuts, it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it can only go so far. So, excuse me, I wanted something that was really able to scale. And with that data, you start to see the different dynamics amongst the teams. You have beautiful organizational data, and you can just do so much more holistically. The other reason I had a lot of respect for this tool was the scientific validity. It's a robust tool based on the best science, but it's also very user friendly. And I was struggling to find other companies that really wanted to build that bridge that focused on the user experience and something that was accessible to all different levels. So I'm here in Italy. I'm based in the US, or I'm from the US, but I'm now based in Italy. And I help our clients really put this tool into practice. So I mentioned it in one of my posts. I'm kind of a nerd. I love interpreting assessment data. And whether I know the individual or maybe, I've never had experience with this individual, sometimes they think I'm reading a crystal ball, or they're, surprised. How do you know all these things about me? And it's all in the data. So I love to make hypotheses and think about how these profiles show up in the real world, and how I can ask better questions and go deeper faster with this person based on the knowledge I have about them in their reports. So that's really our plan for today, is for me to share that experience with you. We'll do a brief review, refresher of the core driver scales, the drivers and the risks. And I'll talk about, common interactions that I see from the research, from my own experience. What are combinations that show up time and time again? And what combinations do clients and companies really care? And then we'll end with a practical example. So I'm really excited to pull up a real profile, give you some context, and then to just explore, to dive in together, to think about, to hear your insights, to share my own, and to think about the questions we might ask this person or the development opportunities that we'd pull out based on their results. So any questions or statements, ideas before we get started? All right. Okay, so let's take a quick review of the core drivers. And like I said earlier, if you're not as familiar, you probably know the five-factor model. Excuse me. It's the most, it has the most theory and reliability of the personality frameworks out there. So there's been so much research conducted to relate these factors to important work-related outcomes. And, why reinvent the wheel? We can use this model, but make it more accessible, more digestible, so that people, when they see the results, they're not left wondering, what does it mean that I'm low conscientiousness? Another reason we split these factors into two sides is to call out the positive benefits associated with each side. So when someone scores low agreeable, they might be a little bit skeptical, defensive, and think that that doesn't sound like a good thing. I want to be high in everything. But we see that people that are low in agreeableness are actually very candid communicators. They're more comfortable having the tough conversations, telling it like it is. And for some cultures, for some roles, being a candid communicator is really a true strength. So we see strengths as well as risks on both sides of the scale. So on the candid side, like I said, very straightforward, can say no, have difficult conversations. And on the high agreeable side, we have people that are considerate, that are more in tune with other people's emotions, their feelings. They're more likely to take those feelings and considerations, more likely to account for those things as they communicate, as they work with others, show that empathy. So it's really interesting to think about how these two communication styles interact and the culture that they're within that team, within that organization. I like to give the example of working with a leader who was really struggling to connect with her team. She came from a very driven, candid culture, and she was used to getting right to the point, sticking to the agenda, driving, pushing them forward. And those are the behaviors that were rewarded where she came from. But in this new culture, her team profile came out as highly considerate, highly outgoing. And that simple realization helped her understand, I just need to build in a bit more time at the start of my meetings to ask people how they're doing, to check in on them, to ask about their weekends, about their family. And that didn't come naturally to her, but it was an easy, quick change that she had control over, that she could insert into those team conversations to really account for that need to be understood, to be heard, to have that social time. So understanding the differences between the leader and the team can be really help these opposite side of the scale. Conscientiousness relates to how people approach their work. In this case, people that are flexible can switch direction quickly. They're comfortable leaving something hanging or switching focus, taking on a new task without finishing something. They're more comfortable with change, with ambiguity. Whereas people that are disciplined tend to like more structure. They're more organized, more detail focused. Now, you might notice that we actually have 6 factors here, and that's because we split extroversion into 2. So we have the sociability side, which is the classic introvert extrovert. Are you more reserved, independent, or outgoing, social, collaborative? But we also have the proactivity side of this scale, which a lot of clients really value. But I think laid back is one of the most misunderstood factors or drivers in this tool. I've also noticed with certain cultures, the connotation with laid back is maybe more negative. And we always say, there's no good or bad driver, but people see laid back and they feel maybe a little defensive, or they might initially say, that's not me. And one thing I like to tell other coaches and consultants using these tools is to remind users not to get so hung up on the label. There's so much more that goes into these scales that we can't capture with just one word. So if people are, a bit defensive or skeptical, make sure they really understand the definition of that driver. And oftentimes they haven't read the full reports. They don't really understand all that goes into it. And that's where the sub drivers can really come in handy as well. But laid back, I tend to describe this more as cooperative, valuing cooperation over competition. So people that are laid back to hear from others first. They don't need to take the lead. They don't need to dominate the discussion. They're easygoing. They're actually really great people to work with. They're a really great team member. They give others credit. They maybe show a bit more humility. Whereas the driven people, you can think of it as almost a sense of urgency. They want to be the first to raise their hand, to contribute their ideas, to take control, to lead the group. Excuse me. So that's how we've separated extroversion into sociability and proactivity. The next scale, openness, is more about thinking styles. So pragmatic people are very logical, very linear, more grounded, whereas the curious side is more conceptual, drawing connections, coming up with new ideas, experimenting. And the example I like to give here is you really need both thinking styles to innovate. You need people to come up with the big ideas, and you need people to make them happen. However, it's almost like these two thinking styles speak a different language, because the curious person will say, I have this great idea, and they won't be able to articulate how they've come up with that. It just makes sense in their head. So the pragmatic person is left wondering, I don't understand this. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if I can trust this. So they really need to learn how to break down those barriers and communicate more effectively, ask the right questions, share more information so that they can understand each other and they can make that magic happen. And they can actually innovate and execute on those ideas. The last scale is around emotional stability, or the neuroticism in the Ocean model. And this one is also people that are passionate, you might think are, they love what they do, they're motivated, they care a lot, but it's not, it's very different from driven. It's more about emotional reactivity. So people that are passionate tend to feel things more deeply. They tend to worry a bit more, experience a bit more stress, but it also makes them more alert to risk, alert to things that could go wrong so that they can get ahead of those obstacles. They're more open and receptive to feedback because they want to improve. They want to be a better version of themselves. There's a lot of benefits to being passionate. But on the other side, you have people that are very cool and composed under pressure. They never waver. They're maybe more optimistic, and they have that calm energy about them. So I'm just going to pause here. Are there any questions about the core drivers, the scales in general, that I can help answer? Or maybe questions you've had from your clients, or anything I can help clarify?
I suppose, why is it just you split out extroversion? Why is it the only one scale that you decided to split out?
It's based on some other research that we've explored that actually break out these scales in two. So there's two factors within extroversion that we think are the most important to measure, that are different enough that they deserved their own scale. And a lot of clients like to see that proactivity scale isn't always included in other assessment tools, and people had that yearning to understand someone's sense of urgency, or how ambitious they will be, how hardworking, how determined. I think you can agree that a lot of companies that value drive, that have a very driven culture, want a way to be able to measure that. But I will say, I've worked with teams and leaders that are very hardworking. They set ambitious goals and they come out as laid back, and they're confused. What it really comes down to, and this is where it can be helpful to look at core values as well, and what motivates them, because they might be laid back, but they might value achievement, and they might just go about achieving those goals in a different, less aggressive or assertive way.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Good question, Craig.
Good question. Hi, this is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Have you thought about calling laid back something else since people misunderstand it?
We've brought that to our team's attention. You know, it's so difficult when you have so many materials with this scale and people that are used to this scale. But I would probably choose cooperative if I had to choose another label. Is there a one word that you think would fit this scale better?
I like cooperative. I think that's pretty great, considering, or maybe even collaborative.
Yeah, easygoing. It's and in Western culture, I think in the US, laid back is maybe more positive. It's chill. It's just having kind of an easygoing, chill, laid back attitude isn't such a bad thing. But I see, especially in India and in parts of Europe, I see more pushback against that scale because they lazy,
Mhm.
which isn't the case.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
well,
on our coast here, like the East Coast doesn't perceive it as high as the West Coast.
Yes. Yes, I'm looking at you in California.
We value laid back, but the New Yorkers, scorn it.
Yes.
I'm here in
Culture
New
differences.
York, and I was just going to say, I deal with so many clients who are working in really urgent and chaotic contexts. So while it's not a perfect fit, it does provide the opportunity to talk to people about, like, you have to slow down, you're making mistakes, you're missing things. So just looking at it as a value. And in a way, I think cooperative doesn't totally get to that
Yeah,
aspect,
yeah.
but I also deal with a lot of people with burnout. So I'm in New York.
This was a tough one to nail down with just one label.
Good points, Michelle. Thank you.
But open to feedback if anyone has another idea. So I think, we can talk briefly about the risks, but are there any questions? You can see how each of these scales come with positive aspects, but taken to the extreme, they can get in our way. So the considerate person can have a hard time saying no, have a hard time pushing back, be too sensitive to the needs and feelings of others, whereas the candid person can be a bit too insensitive at times, not account for those things as much, and that can get in the way of forming bonds and having relationships. So with all of these, it's not necessarily going to show up. It's more at the extreme level when we let our guard down, when we're really comfortable with someone, when we're really stressed, when we're fatigued. It's harder to manage those emotions, and that's when the dark side or the risky behaviors start to emerge. So the most important, I think, aspect of these reports is helping people understand those behaviors that can get in their way, and more importantly, those triggers, or what are the situations when those behaviors emerge, and then what are the consequences. So I think by understanding the interactions between the scales, which we'll talk about here soon, it can help you understand how strengths can be magnified and how risks can also be amplified when certain drivers interact, tend to come together and emerge in certain situations. So that's what we plan to cover here. But I'm going to just turn, I see a good comment here by Eric. So the question is about passionate, or about neuroticism. So, this is an interesting one. There's actually been a lot of research recently looking at the positive correlations with people high on the neuroticism or passionate scale related to intelligence, creativity. So I'd have to maybe go back into the articles I've saved and pull those up. I can share those if anyone's interested. But does anyone else have any thoughts about the passionate scale, and how helpful in certain situations for leaders in certain cultures? I think the main strength we try to showcase is that alertness to risk. to being more aware of what could go wrong and how that can help you get ahead. That's what helped us evolve to be more aware of threats. If there's a big animal rustling around in the forest, and the stable person might say it's nothing, just keep going, and they're the one that's going to be eaten by that animal. So that awareness of our surroundings, of what could go wrong, that awareness of those threats helps us protect ourselves, helps us be more aware of removing those obstacles. The stable person can sometimes have those rosy colored glasses on, miss out on the threats and say it's going to be fine, it's all going to work out, and then it comes to hurt them in the end. Any other thoughts about this scale in particular, though, or things that you've seen?
Well, I think it's in that the descriptions of the positive aspects of each of those traits. Because I had a debrief on last week, and I was going through the passionate scale, and we had a team sort of spread out along where they would sit on one of the scales, being passionate. And I was having a discussion with the people that sat on the passionate and / intense group, and they were sort of becoming quite worried, I suppose, as to that they were regarded as passionate and intense. And it was almost like I could see the scale playing out in that discussion. But it's how you can describe it to say these are really valuable attributes in terms of the awareness of risk, and the ability for them to sort of put focus on important aspects of their team or themselves or whatever, and then be open to feedback. So I think, like you said, there probably is a high correlation of people with anxiety, depression in that group, but it's also being aware of how you pull out the positives and the strengths, which is probably the key to getting some good awareness and good acceptance of that strength.
Absolutely. I work with a client that as a company is very high on the passionate scale and also the driven scale. And they have this attitude like it's never good enough. And that's really what's fueled them and helped them be so successful so quickly, because they're always alert about what could go wrong. They're never quite satisfied. They always want more, and they have that hunger, that drive, that passion to keep going. We've had to help them stop and celebrate the wins and pause, and that can go too far and can create a very intense environment for some employees, but others really thrive in that environment. And I think that's sort of their secret sauce to why they've been so successful, is because they're never satisfied and they're always wanting to improve and do better. And they're very alert to what could go wrong. So they get ahead of those things a lot quicker. That's great. So let's think about how these scales interact. So some common interactions, or, I always get a question in these intro workshops is, what are there certain interactions that I should be aware of? And the first one I hate to label people or to put people in boxes, because there's so much nuance. And even within these drivers, there's sub-drivers, and that helps us understand. Oh, getting some noise back there. So there is the social butterfly. There's this label I'll use to describe someone that really builds and maintains a strong network of relationships. And I see considerate and outgoing sort of hanging together in a lot of these profiles. You can think of this extrovert who is very talkative, very focused on relationships, but also very interested in others. Curious might be another driver that hangs with these three. So someone that is really, going to ask a lot of questions about others, is going to get to know them, and this will really help them build. You can sort of count on these people to rely on these networks to come up with new ideas, to support them, to combine ideas and information, to come up with new things. So I think this is a more think of the The people who really value relationships, considered and outgoing, tend to hang together. The people that get things done and are more focused on delivery, I tend to see as disciplined, driven, and pragmatic. So the disciplined people are creating, systems, processes to get things done. They're very thorough in their work. They want to get things done right the first time and really prioritize the accuracy and the quality of that output. Now, at times, this can mean that they're rigid or they kind of get stuck. Time to double check things. They want more time to make sure everything is in order, and that can get in the way of their pace. Excuse me. However, when they're driven, that gives them that sense of urgency to keep pushing forward, to not get in their own way. They tend to put more energy into that work, and so that helps push them forward. If they're also pragmatic, they can create those systems in a really logical way, and they're not kind of bouncing from idea to idea. So they're more focused on their task and less distracted by competing priorities. So these are the people that can typically handle a lot of work. They can really get things done and push things forward. I call this one the teammate who is seen but not heard. So you might think of that person who doesn't really speak up much in meetings. Now, combined with, maybe they're curious, maybe they're really disciplined, they might have some really great ideas, or they might be able to solve a problem in a new, efficient way, but they're not likely to share that publicly. They're maybe going to come up to the team leader and maybe share that after the fact, or maybe only if they're called on. But I tell coaches and people to look out for this profile because they have the risk of being overlooked, being ignored, sort of withdrawing. They're more independent. They're more, introverted. They're going to want that time to be alone. And if they're laid back, they're not going to assert those ideas. That risk will be amplified when you see this combination of drivers, especially when you're looking at the team context and maybe they're surrounded by more driven, outgoing personalities. These are the people that tend to, other people are maybe stepping on toes, maybe speaking over them, or not giving them the chance to share their ideas. So as a leader, I think it's important to understand who are my more reserved, laid back voices, and am I giving them enough opportunity to share those ideas and to be part of the team. I call, wearing rose-colored glasses. They're not only the easygoing, more cooperative person, but they're also more likely to say it's all going to work out or it's not my problem. So if they're, and this is another distinction between passionate and stable that I think is important. Sometimes the people that are stable don't show their emotions as enough, and the team is left wondering, how do they really feel about this? And when something is going wrong, or there's maybe a problem that should be addressed, that stable person isn't going to speak up and handle that. And the team might want more from that leader, to show more vulnerability, to show more emotion. So I think, it's important to know when those stable people are also laid back, and to call that out, to make sure it's not my problem, or it will all work out. So any thoughts on the combinations that I've shared?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just a question, and I love Samuel's dancing, by the way. Now, does I know all the interpretation reports of deeper signals sort of say by scale, but does it go into this? Oh, actually, this combination, and this, you've got this combination. I might have missed it, or I'm just not aware. Does it pull out those to say, hey, you've got this combination, so you should be aware of it?
No, and that's mainly a big reason for coming up with this workshop and sharing these materials with you all, is we want a playbook for interpreting these interactions, but there's, so many possibilities, and we could even have another work sub-drivers. We can't get through all of those, but we've been through enough of these over time that we're able to say, okay, these are the ones that keep showing up. I think we're at a good point where we can start pulling together, and based on our own research, the research that's out there on the Big Five, to provide this as a resource to our coaches to help with that. So that was sort of the main motivation for this session.
Stephanie, my line of work is executive presence.
Mhm.
And my main question is not either someone has it or not, but what kind of presence people have.
Mm. Mhm.
And this goes exactly to the point of what I use and how I use the tool.
That's great. So you're saying there could be any combination of these drivers that could tell you about someone's executive presence, that there isn't a magic combination of drivers that would
No,
predict?
because as the majority of things we read about executive presence state that you should present some characteristics. And this is not my line of work, because you'd have a lot of, everybody would be just the same.
Exactly.
And for me, it's how you show up.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is how I use the core drivers to understand how people are showing up and how this affects the way they're being seen.
That's excellent, Alana, because even someone with a laid back, stable profile could still have a lot of executive presence. It's just about clarifying, what does that look like? What does that mean? And then what are some of the risks that could take away from some of that executive presence? If that person's under a lot of pressure, if they are under tight deadlines and they're not showing, able to make the final say or show that assertiveness, could that maybe detract from that presence? So
And the way the reports, and what I love about the tool is exactly how the reports give you the two poles of the scale. So the person can understand what is to take 2 steps in the direction of something that is not natural, but that can help in certain situations.
exactly. There's always something you can learn from the opposite. And so even though I know that, being driven is a strength, it really helps me. What can I learn from the people that are laid back, that are, comfortable letting others speak first? And, there's a lot of beauty in that to help find that right balance. Excellent. So I'll just mention a few more quickly, but I'd really love to get to our activity. So the person who can maybe seem a little intense, when you're thinking about group harmony and maybe navigating conflict, I like to see if there's a combination of candid and passionate, because when people are feeling things deeply, they're experiencing more stress, more worry and anxiety, and they're also overtly sharing those feelings with others, without thinking about how expressing that stress or frustration might be affecting someone. That's just quick to call out, what could go wrong. That can just create sort of that, negative environment where you're always, thinking, oh, that person's always going to complain. They're always going to, poke holes in this. And, sometimes that can get in the way of the environment, of a positive culture environment for a team. So thinking about how people express those emotions, I like to look at the combination between the emotional reactivity and then also the agreeableness scale. The one who won't share the microphone, I think we've talked about this, those outgoing, driven personalities can really hog, they like the center of attention, they can hog the spotlight, and they're quick to share, they want to share, they want to hear from others, but they also, like that control, like to take the lead. So when those personalities are paired with others, like I said earlier, that are more reserved and laid back, they can really overshadow those personalities. So it's important to know kind of who to watch out for, especially, when you're facilitating or you're about to go into a team session. You can be aware of those that might really speak more and kind of contribute the most, versus those that you might need to pull out of their shell a bit or ask more questions. This one I've found from coaching, people that do experience a lot of stress and worry, so people that are on that passionate scale, but they're not likely to share that openly. They tend to be more reserved. So they tend to, you know, kind of keep those feelings in. They're not as talkative and open about how they feel. And also when they're really considerate and they care about others and they just don't want to burden other people with their problems. They might be going through a lot internally, but they're not going to ask for help. So for managers, I like to help them understand when people on their team have this profile to say, you know, it might be more on you to take note of when they're going through a lot of stress, when maybe you notice some behaviors that would suggest that this person is really, you know, they have a lot on their shoulders. They're kind of feeling heavy with what's going on. Can you be the one to ask them, to let them know you understand, to let them know you care, because they probably won't ask for that help even if they really need it. Finally, you know, these are more based on the research that's out there on the Big Five, but there's been a lot of work done around plasticity as a predictor of creativity. And when you think about how many ideas you come up with, and then also how novel or original those ideas are, we can tie this back to curiosity and extroversion. So people that tend to have this combination can help you predict someone's potential for innovation. And then I like to look at, you know, when people, this is, you know, such a common question is, do we have innovation potential on our team? And people first go to curious, you know, those are the people that are more experimental, more imaginative, more inquisitive. But can they actually execute on those ideas? Or are they just going to be those idea people that keep coming up with new ideas, but never actually implement or get things done? So I like to see if they're curious as well as either flexible or disciplined. So the risk of flexibility, you know, getting distracted, being a bit too reactive, that risk tends to be amplified when curious and flexible are paired together. Whereas disciplined can sort of mitigate the risk of becoming eccentric or disruptive, because those people that have those ideas are able to create a process or a system to actually implement and help them stay focused. And then when it comes to delivery, you know, people tend to focus on driven, you know, those are the people that are going to get things done. But I also like to look at, or disciplined, but I like to look at this combination. So flexible people might risk missing those deadlines or making mistakes. But if they're also driven, then that can compensate for the risks of becoming flexible, because they're more likely to want to make it happen and to see it through. But if they're flexible as well as laid back, then that risk tends to be amplified, and there's more of a risk of making those mistakes or leaving things hanging. So we'll pass this on to you. You know, it's kind of our first stab at coming up with a collection of interactions, common interactions based on experience, based on research, that can be a guide or resource for you as you're looking at new profiles and thinking about how to make sense and how to provide good feedback or ask the right questions. So any other thoughts, or maybe some combinations that you see as a practitioner? I'll just go back to this main slide that maybe we didn't cover here today that you think would be worth sharing with the group. Okay, well, if you think of a combination that we can come back to, feel free to pop that in the chat. So does something like this, is this the style or the sort of format you would like to see in terms of a resource or guidebook, where we kind of call out the different drivers and then how we might interpret those things? Okay. Or maybe with questions. Are there other questions you get from your clients? Like, what should I look for if I have a culture that is, you know, really XYZ, what's the combination I should look for? Any questions that keep coming up like that? Angela, do you mind sharing driven, curious, and flexible, and that combination, why that's important?
Yeah, it's funny actually, just with the follow-up question you've just given, it's come up with an organization that I've been working with, multiple people having that profile. So I was just
Oh.
kind of curious. I don't know. And I do a lot of work around culture actually. So I'm just curious to understand that a bit more.
So this is a good one to sort of practice as a group too. So we have driven people that are showing that sense of urgency, are ambitious, are maybe sometimes competitive, maybe like to take the lead. They're also curious, so they're going to experiment, ask questions, and they're comfortable kind of switching direction. To me, this combination relates to a culture of innovation, maybe more forward thinking. We want to do what's next. We want to always be kind of agile and willing to change our direction as new information comes in. How does that resonate with this group? How would others describe this combination?
It doesn't surprise me because it's a technology company. So
Okay.
makes sense, yeah.
So that's maybe in line with the culture that you see there.
Yeah.
Fast-paced, rewarding new ideas, comfortable making mistakes. With that other culture that I mentioned that was driven and passionate, that was a big topic for us, is how are mistakes handled? And mistakes were a bigger deal than wins. And so it was getting in the way of their ability to innovate because people are afraid to mess up or to make a mistake. So I think with a culture that has maybe more flexibility, and I don't know where they would fall on passionate or stable, but that tells me that they're more likely to accept those mistakes as learning opportunities and really keep pushing forward and not let that slow them down.
I think one of the challenges they do have actually is that they start a lot of things because they're not
Mhm.
afraid of making mistakes, but then they don't finish things because then they're curious and they go and do another thing over here when they're still, they kind of get bored. And so there's a lot of initiatives that get started and not necessarily completed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of what I pulled out with that combination of curious and flexible, is that, you're so easily distracted by something new and shiny, but hopefully that drive can sort of help compensate for that risk. So it's about maybe leaning into that drive and maybe inserting more discipline or more structure or more process to hold people accountable and to see things through.
Makes sense.
So let's look at a live example now and kind of talk through this together. So this is Kaylin, who is part of a mid-sized marketing firm in the IT department. And the company is really collaborative, really energetic, forward-thinking. And Kaylin was just promoted to director. And she now has 4 direct reports, but this team has pretty high turnover. So she's walking into this position as a really strong individual contributor, but now she is managing others for the first time, really. And the company is about to go through some really big changes. There's a lot of growth on the horizon. And she's really, open to this coaching, this feedback, and really wants to improve and be successful as a new leader. So her profile is reserved, passionate, and pragmatic. And we get some more information. So we'll look at 3 at a time. So first we see her score for reserved, it's the highest, 93. And then passionate and pragmatic are in that high zone. And we see some really interesting subdrivers here, a lot of variability in these scores. So I'm just going to give you a moment to digest this. And I'd love to hear kind of what jumps out at you first, given this context, and any connections you'd make between these scales or these subdrivers.
Just seems she might be easily misunderstood by other people. If she's visibly reserved but also visibly passionate, I think people might not always, and she's really pragmatic, right? Like people might not always understand how to approach her.
there might be some assumptions made. People can't see the nuance or kind of what's underneath because she kind of holds that tight. So maybe less likely to, you know, she's feeling things deeply, but she's maybe not showing as much of herself to others, which could be a challenge.
They might not find her approachable.
Mm.
They might hold back. And if she's in a leadership or management role, then that could present some missed opportunities.
That's a great insight. Yeah. And you know what's interesting is that inattentive score is high, which means she doesn't really care what other people think about her. So maybe not willing to clarify, or if people get things wrong, she might not be as motivated to correct them because she can just kind of rolls right off, which as a manager might be an opportunity. Other thoughts about these three
May I add
drivers or these scores? Yeah, please, Michaela.
just one more, because I hadn't noticed the imaginative, which of course the, you know, flip side of that can be paranoia, right? And if she's if she's really holding everything close to the chest, she may be misreading situations or people's motives, that sort of thing.
Yeah, she's sociable moderately, so she's okay. You know, she wants to. She's not always going to be behind a closed door, but people are really, they're not going to know she's maybe open to that conversation because she's not showing that, you know, friendly, upbeat attitude that's maybe makes her, you know, approachable, like you said. I'll just flip to the second page so you can see how these might interact, but we can go back to this. So also pretty flexible, but organized. So that, you know, throws us for a loop here. And then empathetic, but more on the candid side. So this is a lot to kind of pull together. This was a really complicated one. That's why I chose it, because I think it's really, really interesting. You definitely can't put Kaylin in a box. There's a lot of nuance here and things to unpack. Based on this information, what are some thoughts? Or questions? You know, what are some questions that you would have for Kaylin? You know, what I find really interesting is this empathetic piece is high, but trusting is low, you know, cooperative is low. If you go back, you know, she's reserved, but she probably has a really tight, small group of friends that she really trusts. I think it's probably really difficult to break down those walls and to be included in her circle. But once you're there, she's probably a really strong friend, a good listener, you know, wanting to show that care and concern, but it's probably going to take a long time to get there. So maybe she's been burned in the past or trust has been an issue. So I think talking to her about how she can develop trust on her team and really let them in, and you know, what she has to do, maybe be a little bit more proactive about getting to know them. I think she might be more willing to share, but people aren't really going to ask if they see she's not approachable. But she can put in more effort into building those bridges and getting to know others on her team.
Yeah, you'll probably have a question around, you know, how you're supporting the evolution or development of in the direction you're going. You know, in terms of quite reserved and passionate. So essentially internalize stuff, and then pragmatic probably wants to stay in where they're at now. So and actually, you know, got to internalize her anxieties and the like, and then want to be grounded in what they've done in the past. So actually to evolve and change with the business, you know, that may be challenging.
That's a great point, Craig. I'm starting to, see this picture come together as someone that internalizes a lot of those things and wants to solve it on her own. So as an individual contributor, she's had to be more independent in that work. But now that she has a team, it's like, how can she start to rely on others to let others in and know that she doesn't have to solve these things on her own, that they can do more together if she just lets others in and learns to trust, learns to delegate, learns to share a bit more. So that burden doesn't fall all on her. And she doesn't have to just go right into problem solving mode. She can maybe explore those problems more in a more collaborative way and be a bit more strategic about who can help. I think that the confident and leading piece is really interesting here. And when people are more in the middle, you can think they're probably more coachable in these areas because it's not such a strong trait. It's going to be really tough to get her to, she'll probably never reassess and come out as an outgoing person. This is a core trait of being more reserved. But these scores are more in the middle. So if it's important to show more consideration, to show more drive, it would be easier for her to move the needle in these areas because she's more on the middle line there. And you see that she has stronger traits within these scales, being confident, wanting to lead, showing empathy. So maybe how can she lean into these skills that she already has and show more, do more in these areas so that people can recognize her as a more considerate, high achieving leader that's willing to take the lead, make those hard decisions, show confidence in her team, and really be a champion for those that she manages.
And depending on where she is in her, career, I guess you did say on the first slide, but I've kind of lost that bit of information.
Yeah, no problem.
But it just seems like based on her profile that like encouragement to think about mentoring could help kind of round out some of her, some of the ways in which people might not fully understand her because her traits aren't always visible, if that makes sense. And she might come across as intimidating to junior staff.
That's interesting.
And so maybe like leaning into that empathy and the care to make sure like, how are you mentoring people? How are you checking in with those who report to you? Like
Yeah,
private as in a group setting.
That's a really interesting observation. So because that confident leading piece is high, that's another way she might be misread, or people might make assumptions about her being maybe a scary person to go talk to or share things with.
Unapproachable.
Yeah. So curiosity might be a way to unlock some of these things. How can she ask more questions? Yeah, Craig, you hadn't thought.
It is potentially quite a clash with the company culture. I can see it here. She's probably not too collaborative, and she's probably not too forward thinking. I'm not sure where she's on the curious scale, but definitely in pragmatic she'd be well anchored. So I would say quite a clash there.
And so thinking about too, within the IT department, there's probably a bit more structure. Maybe pragmatic is a useful trait to have, that she has to be able to solve these problems quickly. But as a leader and maybe getting more involved with the strategy and thinking about innovating within the IT department, perhaps this leveraging this curiosity is a real opportunity for her because she has that imagination. I'd really be curious about that and asking her, do you see how things could be improved? How does that show up for you, that imagination and thinking about what's possible? And how can you really take that and paired with your pragmatism, really push those ideas forward, maybe be a bit more open about sharing those things, asking questions, and using that strength that might get pushed away. Or organizing those ideas in a way that makes them easier to execute, come alive. I'd be really curious to see the profile of her team, which we could maybe get into that next time with the same profile to think about if her team is more on the curious side, her pragmatism could really help balance that. But if her team is also very pragmatic or similar to her, some of these risks could also be more problematic, especially, thinking about their need for collaboration, for consideration. Do they work more independently, or are their goals more interdependent? Does she need to facilitate more communication and teamwork amongst them?
Yeah, and also, how she's interacting with other leaders within the organization, because, IT today plays such a facilitator role. They're just part of the
Yeah.
ecosystem. And many other groups are seeking to innovate, whether it's in marketing, digital marketing or sales, going to an ecosystem model or something along those lines. And IT, it's really important for IT to have that approachability and that open-mindedness, because, they need to be able to catch the vision and, execute on it.
Absolutely. Really, really good insight. So I'm hearing a lot of common themes about, as she steps into this leadership role, she needs to work on, her reputation, her executive presence, maybe thinking about how she shows up, how approachable she is. Can she ask more questions? Can she learn how to build trust faster to be able to show those strengths that she has in being empathetic, being able to take charge, to lead, to be confident? But she needs to first work on building that cohesion, that harmony with her group, and really getting to know them, maybe sharing more of herself to develop those relationships, to be able to lead in a way that makes her effective. So thinking about her team, thinking about the leaders she works with, she probably has a lot of work to do, but we know she's coachable, she's open to this. So I think this would be a really rich use case for coming up with a development plan, and sort of the big question would be, where to start and how to prioritize some of this work. But hopefully you can see how, a lot of these reports are very nuanced. Some of the scales kind of contradict. So you really have to paint that picture, to think about it. And if something doesn't make sense, I think that's a really interesting discussion. And so don't be, scared or turned off if something doesn't make sense. Just turn it into a question and ask that person and ask them how these things show up. So hopefully, today you gain some new information about how the scales interact and what that means. And the next time you do a debrief, you'll have more questions to ask, and we'll send these slides to you. We'll keep building these resources out so that you have a guidebook for these interactions, and maybe you'll have some to share with us in the future. So we hope to continue these events at different time zones, and also have sessions about team profiles and how to interpret team results, also in comparison to the manager profile. I think that could be a really interesting discussion. But any other final thoughts from you all? I know we're at time, or ideas for future sessions, things that you'd like to see?
Actually, more of this, because I think we just really scratched the surface today.
Yeah. So more kind of profiles, examples with, here's the context. How would we interpret these?
Yeah, Stephanie, that was a great idea in terms of looking at this from her team perspective. So that would be an interesting future session. But I also think that this person's just been promoted to manager or director, so she'll have some new peers that she has to work with and form her second team, if you like, or even her primary team, depending on how you think of it. So a lateral kind of assessment with her peers would be really interesting too, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll use this example for the next one, so there'll be some continuity. But thanks, everyone. I think Emma might have a short poll if you want to hang on and answer a question about the session today, so we can continue to make these better in the future. But if not, we'll follow up with the recording, we'll follow up with the slides, and we'll definitely keep this conversation going. Be sure to join our new LinkedIn group for practitioners. And I'd love to, keep this conversation going in that chat, in these comments. If you have an interesting profile, even, removing any identifying information, but just saying, this is a really interesting score. What do others make of this? We can really use that as a platform for sharing those ideas, asking those questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. No poll for now, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I will be sending a very, very short survey to everyone here tomorrow or the next day, so would really appreciate your feedback through that. I promise it'll only be a few questions, so thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you today. Take care and see you next time.